Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining Elder Climate Action's third and final part of our workshop series, Climate Policy. You can change it. The first two parts, the last 2 months, focused on local and state policy influence. And today we conclude with federal climate policy influence. My name is Mark, and I am co-chair of ECA's Education Committee. We are privileged to have 6 presenters, each of whom will be introduced immediately before their dedicated time. The first 5 presenters will have up to 10 minutes each, and our 6th and final presenter will have 5 minutes as a quick preview for part of February's national call. After all 6 have presented, we intend to have 20 minutes of Q&A with the panel as a whole. If you have a question, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom middle of your screen rather than the chat function, please. We plan to conclude by 8 Eastern time. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Demond Drummer is co-founder and executive director of New Consensus and an organizer and civic innovator whose grassroots work in Chicago has been recognized by the Obama White House, Code for America, and the Aspen Institute. New Consensus, founded to promote the Green New Deal, is a policy design shop and movement-oriented think tank, educating those in power and converting ideas into policy. The title of Demond's talk is We Can Afford It. Please take it away, Demond.
All right, thank you so much. I'll get to it, and I do appreciate the opportunity to work out a gripe that I have with the public discourse around bold policy proposals like the Green New Deal, like aggressive climate action, as if our lives and livelihoods depended on it. And so I'm going to slow down and screen share. And we can get to it. So yes, the theme of my presentation is we can afford it. I think when it comes to understanding how to pay for it and how to answer that question when people may ask you, how do we pay for all of this stuff? I just want to offer 3 shifts in thinking that we can focus on as we dialogue with our friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, and enemies about how to get this stuff done. And these 3 shifts in thinking is something that we have to take up in the area of money and markets. And so bear with me just for the next few minutes as I don't go into numbers, but I go into how we think about money and markets. Particularly as it relates to climate policy, but also as it relates to restoring justice, not even restoring justice, bringing about justice in our economy and closing racial and regional wealth gaps. So I want to start with a quote from Jane Jacobs in her seminal work, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She writes in the last chapter, all problems cannot be thought about in the same way. Which avenues of thinking are apt to be useful and to help yield the truth depends not on how we might prefer to think about a subject, but rather on the inherent nature of the subject itself. The reality is that you cannot solve the climate crisis if you try to fit the solution within a market framework. And by what I mean a market framework, this kind of neoliberal market fundamentalist framework where everything has to pencil out for investors and businesses. That's just the wrong way to think. And I want to go through how that's the wrong way to think and a more productive way to think about how to go about organizing the whole of our society to get this done. So the first shift that we have to do is shift from thinking about currency or money to the economy, which is the resources of our entire society. I want to tell a quick story about a sage or a prophet you may have heard of named Jesus. He was hanging out with his disciples near a lake, and a crowd gathered. It was 5,000 families, and he turned to his disciples and said, we need to feed these people, because if we don't feed them, they're gonna start getting angry, right? And then his disciples said, we don't have enough money to feed these people, right? Now this is in the Bible, y'all. I didn't make this story up, right? And it's in every single gospel. There's 4 of them, right? This is in every gospel. The only miracle that is in every gospel. Jesus says, I'm not talking about money. I said, feed the people. And you know the story, some boy walks up, he has fishes and loaves, and Jesus prays over it, and it gets multiplied and people can eat. The way I read this story is that this is like an example of separating the currency from the economy. Remember, this prophet had a very strange relationship with Caesar's currency, literally lifted up the coin and said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar." So the coin did not reflect the resources all around him. It did not reflect the fish in the lake that they were standing by. That coin did not reflect the field and the wheat and the fruit and the plants that could grow in that field. The coin is about scarcity when we have abundance in our world. And so it's really just about spreading that abundance justly and equally. So we have to shift our conversation from currency to the economy. So the question isn't how much money is it going to cost? The question is, do we have the capacity to do it? And the answer is yes, we do have the capacity, right? To transition to a zero carbon economy, a zero waste society, a zero poverty country. We can do that. We have the resources, we have the ingenuity, we have the know-how. What we lack is will, right? So that's shifting from currency to economy. I hope the sound is good. I feel like I'm yelling. The second shift is moving away from thinking and fixating on profitable investments and focusing on productive investments. What do I mean by that? Think about any given house, right? When somebody wants to do energy efficiency upgrade or maybe electrify their house so they don't burn natural gas in their home and poison the air in their own home and poison the environment around them. You know, the financing of that upgrade, right? The financing of rooftop solar, all of this stuff has to be profitable on an individual housing unit basis, right? That is the wrong way to go about something that we all need to do, right? Is it profitable for a school to be electrified, to have solar panels on its roof, right? Is it profitable to do the right thing? We have to move away from profitability on the micro scale and look at how these massive investments in our economy will grow the economy on the micro scale. So it may not be profitable for my family, right? I may not make economic sense for my family to do the investment to upgrade our home and get rooftop solar and go full electric and get the highest level of efficiency in our home. But it makes sense for our city, Chicago, and our country to upgrade every building because that creates jobs. It cleans up our environment. You know the deal, right? So moving from profitability to productivity, that's the second shift that we have to really do, own and carry out that lane. Happy to answer questions about that during Q&A. The last shift, and this is an important one, is shifting our minds from seeing government as only a taxer and regulator to seeing government as an investor and shaper of markets. Now, let me pause here. I said investor and shaper of markets. That's to say that we have this idea in our head, not those of us on this call, but a lot of the people that we talk to have this idea that the government stands outside of the economy and stands outside of the economy and just kind of gleans taxes off of the economy and limits economic productivity through regulations and laws, right? That is not the full story. The government is an investor in the economy. Public schools add to our society, which is the economy, right? Highways, the mail service, the postal service, GPS satellites, 80% of the technology in the iPhone directly funded by the government, right? The government is an investor in our economy, and it's also a shaper of markets, right? And what do I mean by that? There's people out here who believe that markets are these natural entities that are like plants or like gravity, and you have to follow the laws of the market. And if something doesn't work in the market, it doesn't work at all. And that's not the case. And I want to talk about a scenario, a big scenario, where the government is clearly a shaper of markets, so we can begin to understand that the government has power to shape labor markets, energy markets, financial markets to serve the interests of society. And this is a quote from Ira Katznelson's Fear Itself, the New Deal and the Origins of Our Time. And he says, "The uncommonly wide repertoire of ideas and techniques that were considered and adopted during this era's chaos of experimentation simply would have been impossible without the willing audacity of the segregated South. None of the early New Deal could have happened had the South not been convinced that the Democratic Party would continue to protect its racial order. What does this quote say? It says, the hood in Chicago that surrounds where I live right now is created by the government shaping the housing market, cutting Black people out of that housing market, right? So that Black families could not build up wealth like white families could, deciding that Black people will rent from the government, deciding that white families will own, subsidized by the government. The government shapes the housing market even today. And so just like the New Deal shaped the hood, right? And shaped the racial wealth gap that we experience just in housing wealth alone, right? The government is a shaper of markets. Moving on to the last point, we saw in 2008 and most recently 2020, our Federal Reserve System, you know that quote, where the money resides, right? And just to be clear, another myth that we got to dispel is that the money is private. No, money is public, right? That is public money created by our government, right? The Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars and handed it right over to Wall Street. And then the Senate is debating whether or not $2,000 for a family is too much, right? And so this idea that the government is just a taxer or regulator is completely false. And I think 2020 shows us this, that we have the means to create the money, to mobilize the resources, to do productive work, to clean up our environment, to do the right thing, cut Black people into the economy, do right by our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and get this thing done. So there's nothing stopping us from doing it. We have the means to get it done. Money is just a tool that cannot stop us. That would be looking at the problem the wrong way. So yes, we can afford it, and we can afford all of it. And that concludes my remarks for this panel. Thank you. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thanks, Damon. Our next speaker is Cindy Burbank, who is Virginia's Congressional Liaison for Citizens Climate Lobby. After retiring from a 34-year career in federal government, Cindy provided climate change consulting for state transportation agencies and conducted climate research, training, webinars, and presentations for other private and public agencies. She was also co-author of the federal government's 2014 National Climate Assessment. The title of Cindy's talk is Climate Change and Conservatives, Acceptance, Hope, and Action. Please take it from here, Cindy.
Wow, I'm still digesting Damon's remarks because I too am going to talk about the market and the economy and how we can have government shape the market to solve our climate problems and create more fairness. I'm going to speak both from the perspective of this group, Citizens Climate Lobby, and a little bit later from a bit of a conservative perspective in our bipartisan efforts. But first, CCL. We're nonprofit, we're free to join. We welcome all of you to join us. Grassroots, bipartisan. We've got 446 groups around the country, 170,000 supporters, and we really work in the community as well as on Capitol Hill. And trying to advance my slide here. Not sure why it's not advancing. Okay, our goals. Number one, drive down greenhouse gases quickly, because we all know we've got to drive them down and we need to start fast. We want to use incentives, supporting choice and innovation. We want to help the economy and households, and we firmly believe we have to have bipartisan support. So we reach out to both Republicans and Democrats. What do? We lobby Congress. That's at the top of our list. We go and meet with our members of Congress several times a year. Locally, we do local climate events, reach out to family, friends, and neighbors, write letters to the editor, and so forth. Our number one focus to drive down greenhouse gas emissions, that shaping the market that Damon talked about, would be carbon fee and dividend legislation. Number one, at the source of fossil fuels, at the wellhead or the coal mine or wherever it originates, place a fee on it. Start at $15 a ton per ton of carbon potential and increase it every year by 10 years. That'll bring in over time a lot of money. Take all of that money, divide it up among households, and return it all to households as a dividend. Very powerful approach, very simple, but very powerful. And it really works as a economic lever in the marketplace. It would drive our greenhouse gas emissions down 33% lower and 52% lower within 20 years. It is more powerful than any other policy tool that is being looked at. We're not saying that this alone will solve climate change, but it's the #1 tool in the toolkit, the most powerful. And virtually any comprehensive look at driving down greenhouse gases draws that conclusion, from MIT and their En-ROADS simulator to Columbia University's analysis of our proposal, and many, many others. And it will drive innovation in every sector, and it'll create motivations for both households and businesses to change. This is an important graphic. It's complicated, but let me just walk you through it. So you see at the bottom, we have the years from 2020 out to 2050. And the top, or the vertical, is showing the emissions of carbon, starting with 2020 and where we are now. That sort of purple band in the middle, that's the target for the IPCC. That's what they say we need to get within that band to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Our proposal is the green dotted line that goes right through the middle of that purple swath. Below it, there's another green dashed line called the RFF model. That's an environmental economics group that analyzed our model, and they found that it would have even lower emissions than we were expecting. One last thing I want to point out. In the turquoise up at the top where it says CPP 2030 target, that was the Obama Clean Power Plan, which may be resurrected. But despite all the tug of war about it, it really wasn't going to do very much for lowering our greenhouse gases. It only went after the electricity sector, and the targets were really quite modest. In Virginia, where I live, it wouldn't have been any better than business as usual. And that's not just my conclusion, that was the Sierra Club's conclusion. So we need something far more powerful than the Obama plan. And we think it's that green dotted line through the middle, which is our approach. The dividend, it's really good for households. By year 10, when the dividend has increased every year, we would be returning to families of four over $4,000 a year. That's a big shift from fossil fuel producers to households. And even more important, it's the low-income households that will gain the most. This graphic shows the first bar is for all households in the United States. And it shows that 61% of them are benefited by our policy. They get more money from the dividend than they have to pay in higher prices for, say, gasoline or electricity while we're adapting. But the second band, that is for the lowest income households, the lowest 20% of the households in our economy. 96% of those households are better off, significantly better off. They get more back from the dividend than they're paying in carbon prices. That tiny 3% sliver, they have a loss of less than 0.2% of income. That's a loss of less than $100 a year for that 3% of households. So this dividend is perhaps the most progressive policy that we could adopt, as it also is the most powerful policy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We crafted this to be bipartisan by working with both Democrats and Republicans. So it appeals to Republicans and conservatives because it uses the marketplace, it shapes the marketplace, as Demond put it. In terms of our federal budget, it's revenue neutral. It doesn't increase the deficit. It avoids regulations. It doesn't pick the winners or losers. It lets that play out from the choices that households make every day. On the Democratic side, it has a lot of appeal because it is so powerful in reducing greenhouse gases. It imposes the costs upstream, and it is so progressive. It is so beneficial to the lower income households and protects the poor. Conservatives, now I'm going to shift a little bit, putting a conservative hat on here. Why would conservatives support this, and who are the conservative groups and individuals who do? These are just some of them. First and foremost, the Climate Leadership Council, led by George Shultz, who was in Ronald Reagan's cabinet, and Jim Baker. They have a plan that's virtually identical to ours. A wonderful group called Republican that I'm also a member of, a libertarian group, the Niskanen Institute, past and current senators and members of Congress, and so forth. So there's growing conservative support for this. And I've already kind of mentioned this. Why would conservatives support it? How are we reaching out to them to gain their support so that they are helping us solve climate change? So many of the same reasons I cited a minute ago. It's not just conservatives who are growing in support of it. We've much greater support on the Democratic side. 86 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives, endorsements from local governments, editorial boards, everything from the Washington Post to the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and even the Dallas Morning News and the Houston newspaper. A lot of businesses, faith groups, nonprofits, and a lot of prominent individuals. Now, just a message from our founder, CCL's founder, Marshall Saunders, who passed away a few months ago to our great dismay. He started CCL believing, I used to think that the important people were taking care of the important problems. No, preserving a livable world is up to us little people. What we do and do not do really counts. So kudos to you, ECA, and all of those who are participating here, because we may be the little people, but we are shifting the gears and we are going to solve this. So think about it. What is your action plan? I'll just suggest a few thoughts to add to what you may already be doing. Keep talking to your family, friends, and neighbors. That's what we do in CCL. Focus especially on a really effective national policy. Make sure you ask an advocate of a policy, what are the numbers and who has analyzed it and supports it as being really effective. Consider joining CCL while you stay in your own organizations. You're making a difference. Help us lobby Congress. When we go up to Capitol Hill, we take constituents in to meet with our members of Congress. Finally, I just wanted to say there's so much more I'd like to cover, and you may have questions. Feel free to contact me afterwards. The best way for me is email, and then we can set up a phone call and discuss it. So cindy.burbank@comcast.net. Feel free to get in touch with me. So that's the end of my remarks. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and turn it back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Felice Stadler is next. Felice is Vice President of Political Affairs for the Environmental Defense Fund, hereafter EDF, providing strategic direction of the program's federal advocacy. She has worked to advance clean air and climate policy for over 20 years, spearheading nationally prominent campaigns and investing in partnerships advancing solutions. She is also National Director of Clean Air Moms Action, a project of EDF Action focused on inspiring and activating women to vote for pro-environment candidates. Prior to joining EDF in 2015, Felice worked at the National Wildlife Federation for 15 years, directing the organization's climate program and related advocacy campaigns. The title of her talk is How We Can Influence Climate Policy on Capitol Hill. Please take it away, Felice.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. So I just want to start by saying 17 hours. I just checked my timer, 17 hours, and we're going to have finally leadership change. God help me if something goes awry in these next 17 hours. It has been a very, very dark 4 years. I am excited to be, for the first time in those 4 years, presenting what the path looks like in terms of advancing climate policy. So I'm going to break up my remarks in a couple of different ways. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the context after what Congress, what Washington, D.C., what the executive branch looks like after 17 hours. I want to put a little bit of context of what we envision unfolding and just in terms of the sequence of activity. And then I'm going to end by talking about the first 100 days and the next 100 days. This is a kind of a way as an organizer, the way we sort of think about how we approach our advocacy in Congress. So let me first start with kind of context. At this time, tomorrow, we're going to have a new president and we're going to have a new vice president. We're going to have a divided government. We have very, very slim margins. So we know what the makeup is in the Senate. What a phenomenal turn of events after Georgia. And in the House, the Democrats lost a number of seats. So the margins are slim. But for the first time in 4 years, we have a committed executive branch, really committed to our issues. We also have the administration coming in, a new administration coming in, facing some pretty monumental, I don't want to say insurmountable, but monumental crises. Racism, the economy, COVID, the workforce, and of course, climate, which is the thing that we're here to talk about. But our work at EDF, we've spent a lot of months, really since COVID, really paying attention and recognizing that it is absolutely essential that we foreground the crises that are plaguing many of our lives and livelihoods as we simultaneously look to see how we can continue to forge ahead and make progress in driving down carbon emissions and moving our economy and our country towards a zero carbon future. So that's what it looks like. The last thing I'll say in terms of context, I know we just got through an election, but the day after tomorrow, everyone is focusing on 2022. Not exclusively, but everyone in Congress is going to be focusing on 2022, and the leadership in the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership is very much focused on 2022. Which states, which districts, all super important. The margins were really thin in many places, and that will drive a lot of the discussion on Capitol Hill. So that's sort of just kind of broad kind of atmospheric context. In terms of policy context, I think there's sort of a couple different ways that we're thinking about it. One is, as we've heard, the incoming administration talks about the whole of government approach to addressing climate change. Former President Obama had a similar a similar approach as well, really work to infuse climate across all federal agencies. This is taking it to the next level. New appointments, new positions, real opportunities that are going to present themselves. There's a whole of economy approach, which comes with the whole of government. And then for us, of course, it's every industry. If you're looking at the major sources of climate pollution, how do we advance policies that make sure that we're getting all of the major industries? It might surprise you to hear that for EDF, we're not looking at just one path. I'm not here to present one piece of legislation that we're all kind of rallying around and getting behind. That we firmly believe over the next 2 years that we need to make sure that climate is part of every path, every piece of legislation that's moving, every debate that's happening, hearings, reports, oversight, you name it, caucus meetings. Climate needs to be infused across those opportunities. We don't know what all the opportunities are that are going to open. And it behooves us to grab those, whatever they look like. We need to really, again, make sure that, and for EDF, and this is when I say we, this is really, I'm speaking for EDF. It's the approach that we're taking, is making sure that everything we're doing is, again, foregrounding the need for jobs, creating jobs, spurring US manufacturing, making communities healthier. We know that there's policies that have been drafted, bills that were already presented last year that provide us, that can pave a way for making those investments. And additionally, we need to build bipartisan support, as Cindy mentioned. Because of the margins being so slim, I also firmly believe that just because there's a D after somebody's name doesn't mean you can assume they're going to vote a certain way all the time. And it's the same with if there's an R after somebody's name. There's a lot of private support among Republican lawmakers, but publicly they're reluctant to speak out. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is investing locally to make sure that they feel like, as we call it, that they have the permission structure, that they feel like it's not just good policy, but good politics. I will just, though, be very, very clear. This does not extend to the group of 147, 150, approximately, it's 147, 8 senators, 139 House members that perpetuated and were behind the atrocities that we saw unfold last week. So we're not working with them. So let's talk about the first 100 days. So why is the first 100 days important? So as an organizer, we spend a lot of time focusing on the first 100 days as your window, our window, to set the tone, present our agenda, and make sure that that our issues that we know are of utmost importance are part of the conversation from day one. If we don't seize the opportunities in the first 100 days, then we're going to slip, and we can't afford to slip because we only have 2 years. I just want to reemphasize, we only have 2 years, and then we have another election, and who knows what it looks like. If there's one thing I've learned in 2020 is you can't really plan too far in advance because things change very, very quickly. So we are looking for, in the first 100 days, for wherever we can push constructive action in whatever form. Again, believing that success begets success. Let's get those toeholds. Let's get some wins. Let's get some good conversation happening. Let's get votes for the things that we know are going to be absolutely critical. Votes for things that are going to essentially create a down payment for precisely whether it's the policies, investments, signals to the market that will move us towards a 100% clean energy economy. That could look at, there's a lot of conversation obviously around another recovery bill. So we saw a massive bill pass in December that had a number of things in it. It's it's not the relief bill. There's going to be relief bill, then there's going to be another recovery bill. There's a lot of conversation about infrastructure. We have a crumbling infrastructure system in this country. I don't think that should be lost on anybody. I don't think there's been any major investment made there. There's something really sleepy called the budget, the federal budget, but it's really, really important. And not everybody pays attention to it just because it's like really complicated. Not that it's complicated, it's just, it takes a lot of time and really getting into the weeds of it, but paying attention to kind of where there's money, where is it focused? What are the agencies that are getting left behind? What are the programs that are getting cut? There's so many cuts in the last 4 years, a lot needs to be plussed back up, but there's also real opportunities to drive investments in new areas. And of course, legislation. So there's already, members are trying to figure out what they want to drop. There's some bills that were really good ones last year. They might seem small bore. I'm going to give you an example. Seems small bore, super important. This is about getting some points on the board. It's about electrifying the school bus fleet in the country. Really important. And why should that be only something that's available to well-financed school districts? Should be an opportunity for all school districts. And there's an opportunity for that. It's a bill that Vice President-elect Harris drafted, introduced a year ago, and Senator Cortez Masto is looking at reintroducing it this year. So again, seems small, it's not small, really, really important. We need to continue to sort of get those notches on the board, get some wins, success begets success. So I would say now, between now and Earth Day, there's this is a big network, real opportunity, strength in numbers. And pick one thing to do. Cindy already mentioned it. Meet every member of Congress that's in your delegation. Really important. Present a specific request. Ask how you can help them. We don't do that enough. Ask how we can help them. They're coming in with long to-do lists. Oh my gosh, we got a lot. We have a lot to take care of after 4 years of incredible neglect and the evisceration of critical programs and policies. Find a bill that excites you to unify behind. I mentioned the school bus bill. There's going to be an environmental justice for all bill, a number of other bills. There's going to be a big one on voting rights, HR 4, the John Lewis bill. I know I just butchered. I don't know. The HR 1 is another one looking at voter access, voting rights. So there's no shortage of good legislation that's going to move. Pick something. And then on the second 100 days, again, strength comes in numbers. Recruit 5 people who are currently not part of your meetings and ask them to join you at that second meeting. Think about bringing young people that are in your family, in your friends circle, maybe in your church group or another civic group, maybe someone that you're related to. Encourage them to join you in this meeting. Bring 5 people. Bring them to the next meeting. Reinforce all the things that I mentioned before. Come with a particular ask. Ask them how you can help them. Share your vision of what you want to see happen after the second 100 days. And then I'll conclude by saying, remember to thank members of Congress every time they do something good, even if it seems small. We sometimes kind of leapfrog that, kind of move to the next ask. It's just, as organizers, I know it. I've been organizing for 20 years. I'm always like, what's the next thing we got to do? Because this isn't, we're just kind of getting some momentum. Really important to stop and thank our members. They really appreciate it because what we want to do is we want to continue to sort of build goodwill because the asks are going to get bigger and more significant and the stakes are going to grow. And you can thank them with a letter to the editor, a phone call, a personal letter to the office, but always thank them. And of course, if they misstep, then hold them accountable. So with that, I conclude my remarks.
Thanks, Felice. Our next speaker is Todd Fernandez. Todd currently serves as Executive and Legislative Director of Climate Crisis Policy and organizational member of the U.S. Climate Action Network. Previously, Todd served as General Counsel and Legislative Director for the Massachusetts Office of Economic Affairs. In 2018, he launched Climate Action Mondays with Sunrise Movement and other environmental groups demanding congressional climate legislation. He also led efforts for the LGBT Equality Act, the Climate Emergency Media Standards, Extinction Rebellion, New York Times Action, and the New York City Chase Coalition. The title of Todd's presentation is the Earth Bill Network, Uniting for Results This Congress. Todd, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My video is not working, so I'm going to try a little screen share to give you some sort of visual while I'm talking. Let's see if this works. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes,
Yep.
we can. Yes.
Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Todd Fernandez. It's great to be with everyone. I'm a little discombobulated because I took an emergency vacation and my head was in the sand, so to speak, today. And I'm having all sorts of technical difficulties, including the video. And so I'll try to get through this. With climate crisis policy, as was mentioned, I previously worked on the Equality Act, and I spent 6 years basically getting the climate movement, the gay rights movement to change its federal legislative strategy and file a comprehensive equality bill adding us to all the civil rights laws. That was a huge paradigm shift for our movement to a sense of entitlement to equal protection under the law from begging for pieces of things. A few years ago, I turned my attention to the climate movement, and I started researching all the organizations, and I quickly realized that there didn't seem to be a federal legislative strategy or a national coalition of climate organizations. And I had been involved in immigration movement in 2010, where they had Reform Immigration for America. It was a national coalition with state chapters or state coalitions that were affiliated. The New York Immigration Coalition, for example, has 200 members and 36 staff members. And to my knowledge, there's not a single national climate coalition even. This is just a state one. Not that we don't have a national climate coalition, and particularly not one with its own staffing on that magnitude, that's public facing, that's inclusive, that has a legislative strategy that everyone's working on together. So I joined the climate movement. I've been basically a volunteer all this time and trying to push a big picture movement strategy. And as it says, in 2018, we worked on the All Fossil Fuels Act, and I brought off Sunrise through 350 NYC and Food and Water Watch, which was behind that Off Fossil Fuels Act, and other groups together, and got everybody going after co-sponsors for that short but fairly comprehensive bill that was drafted with about 400 organizations participating in that process. March for Science, Food and Water Watch, and others. That really got the tone going and the interest going in federal legislation, particularly among the activists in New York. And so after that, in 2019, everyone was, the kids went to Nancy Pelosi's office after our work, and Sunrise turned its attention to federal legislation, and AOC and the Democratic Socialists of America were involved in our coalition, and they were working with AOC, and then she won, she had endorsed everything. She showed up, and that gave a whole hoopla to the Green New Deal. But the question then was, well, what should be in a comprehensive piece of climate legislation? And so we spent the next year compiling over 150 expert sources and documents into something called the Climate Crisis Policy Digest. I'll show you that in a second if I can switch over. And so we collected 150 expert reports, laws, bills, and summarized them all using Project Drawdown's list of 100 greenhouse gas sources. And so under electricity, for example, you'll see all the reports that call for 100% renewable energies by date certain. And all the reports are listed and cross-referenced so that you can see which reports have the same idea. And the idea with this was to present the full scope from the expert's perspective of what the solutions are, the policy solutions specifically. And so that does show the lay of the land, and that's worked out quite well. We launched that this year. And what came of that is we decided to move forward around 10 bills. Let's see here, I'm already moving on a little bit. This wasn't the presentation I was going to share. But we organized around a package of bills this past year. There were 10 bills on refrigerants, plastics, forest and wetlands, international forestry, big ag, regenerative farming, animal farming, pesticides, fracking, the end of fossil fuel tax subsidies. And we used those as a test case for building local coalitions at the congressional district level. And so we created a concept called Adopt a District. And local organizations have been adopting their district, and there are about 100 of them adopted. And it's the local Sierra Club or the local 350, the local Climate Reality Project. We have lots of CCL members in our team. And so you get the idea. The idea is to unite across policy sectors so that we can begin to cobble together the kind of power that's necessary to actually pass definitive science-based, mandate included federal legislation that so as part of this, that all went well for the last 6 months. And then in December, we hosted a big symposium, invited a lot of people on this panel. And it was a 2-day symposium with 6 sessions, and all the executive directors and high-level folks from a wide array of organizations and coalitions attended. And from there was enough momentum and desire for us to forge ahead. And that's why I'm on an emergency vacation. Because after that, we decided we're going to keep going, and with a lot of positive feedback and encouragement, we decided to formalize our nationwide network of these local communities in something called an Earth Bill network. And then we're going to proceed ourselves to craft a climate bill. We're calling it the Earth Bill as it's a conceptual name, and it will probably end up being a large package of legislation, of bills. And we're going to be using the digest that we created with all those policies identified by specific subtopic and project drawdown, as I've said, and then we'll compare new bills and new proposals that come out from various groups. The Green New Deal Coalition is working on a bill. U.S. Climate Action Network has a whole policy proposal framework. And so we're going to be collecting all of these pieces by policy sector. So there are 15 policy sector groups now. And we're going to go through this in a very public and transparent process, and we'll see where the commonality of opinion is. And we're coordinating with MIT and Project Drawdown to do calculations of the projected greenhouse gas impacts from proposed legislation, so we know precisely that what we pass through federal legislation, what we are asking for, will actually have the intended impacts, and so that it's not just in the realm of hypothetical analysis, but we're going to have scientific on each one of these bills, and they have the technology, they say, to do that. And then they're also going to help guide the process of crafting the legislation, so we'll know where the biggest bang for the buck is. Maybe they'll set the goalpost for us. So this is a big challenge that we're undertaking this year, and we'll be meeting every Saturday. Oh no, we've switched our schedule. We're meeting regularly twice a month. We have over 200 people from various organizations all over the country who have signed on to now join this bill drafting work, and we'll be diligently working on this. As another piece of this, Attell Higonot from Mighty Earth, and she's going to the Nature Conservancy, or I forget which group she's going to now, but she's been very instrumental in working to form partnerships. So we're talking to all sorts of organizations. Fridays for the Future are going to run our youth group. We have a whole faith team that's incredible, run by Corinna Gore and Livona Grove from the Unitarian Universalists, and the United Church of Christ is on this. And they're all mapping where they have congregations in the various congressional districts. And so this is really the work we invite everyone to particularly join this effort of adopting your congressional district. And you can either do this through your organization and maybe get a few people who want to help coordinate your folks on that level, and then we'll connect them to ours. Let's see if I can show you real quickly before my time runs out, the policy digest. So just here you can see it, all the sectors are listed. Here's the beginning page, our digest. All the sectors are here. If you clicked on electricity and go to general energy policy, you'll see here, mandate 100% renewable energy power by 2030. And then you see the All Fossil Fuels Act is here, a letter to Congress from a lot of people, Green New Deal to save the planet, moral agenda on people's rights. You can see all the documents that support this idea. So this gives you the idea of the digest. On the digest, we have the 2020 bill campaign. Oh, this is not a touch screen computer. And here are all the bills that I mentioned earlier, and we'll be adding to those as new bills are. And then we also have all the votes. So here you can see all the congressional districts, and you can adopt your district right through this system. And some of them are already adopted. I don't know how far I have to go down to see one. There's one. And you see California 20. We're still updating this with all the new people. And if you click on it, you'll see there's her name, her email, her organization, Santa Cruz Climate Action Network. And they will serve as point people for building these local congressional district teams, because that's really where the power resides. So we think between a comprehensive climate bill, which is a big journey, and then this adopted district network for the logistical mechanisms, that will create, that'll be the path to cohesiveness and building the unity required to have the requisite political power. I think I can, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say about this. I guess I said it really, but the approach we're taking is really truly scientific. You know, we want to stop worrying about the politics, stop worrying about what people perceive to be the political power within the current system, politically and otherwise, and to build a demand from the grassroots, from civil society, because I believe personally, I've never seen a movement with such vast potential, thousands, literally thousands of organizations and people that care about this, and they're not working together. So if you're trying to bring down Godzilla, or, you know, I don't like bringing down Godzilla, poor thing, but I think of that little television program where they had the giant go to this, and all these little people brought down the giant, you know, and they had them all roped up. Well, everyone didn't go into that fight with their own little piece of lasso. They had a strategy and a plan, and they worked together to bring down the giant. And so that's what we need to do here. We're still living and talking about organizing within the status quo that has existed for the last 10, 20, 30 years in terms of the civil society's organizing framework. And to me, this is shocking. Tomorrow, the environmental movement writ large could be a force that would never have to ask. They would be in a position to demand if they could unify. And so I'm calling on the coalitions that exist to form a coalition of coalitions. This is beyond past time for this responsibility of that leadership role to have accountability and transparency and to come forward and tell the world what the plan is. We cannot continue to work through secret insider processes that are exclusive and small. And even though individual groups think that they're big, you know, it's like trees in a forest. You might be a big tree in the forest, but you're not powerful enough by yourself. It takes the whole forest. And I think the facts, the results, the lack of results legislatively and in policy bear this out, which is why I'm embarking on this plea for unity. We need a plan for unity more than we need anything else. The policy ideas have been processed and debated to death. And we're spending 95% of the time doing the same things. We should spend at least 30 to 50% of our time on coalition building and making sure we're working on collective federal legislation together. And with that, I'll stop and get off my soapbox. And I thank you all so much for inviting me, including me, and welcome you all to our work as well. And I'm hoping we're going to be partners on this going forward. Oh, the last piece I'll just mention, that Netroots Nation is excited about this, and they're going to have their pre-conference in August before the big Netroots Nation event be about a massive climate bill. So we're going to bring in a vast progressive world that's not in this fight yet. And between now and then, we got to figure out what needs to be in that bill so that we are ready to present a united front. And this doesn't mean that all the individual pieces and all the moving parts won't continue to happen, as Felice is talking about and everyone's working on. And we'll check off pieces as they happen. But I think the real tough stuff is not going to happen. The mandates, particularly. Why aren't we talking about mandating all utilities go to 100% renewable by 2035? That should be in every bill and any bill. There's no reason not to do that. Because it just sets a market signal that everyone's so excited about that will then create procurement mandates from utility companies that will spur the private sector renewable energy world, because they know there'll be a revenue stream, and then we'll finally find a path and a plan to build the scale of renewables that we need to replace fossil fuels. So anyway, you get the idea. Once we know exactly what we want, I think we can get it if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Our next speaker is Colette Pichon Battle. She is founder and executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, developing programs on equitable disaster recovery, global migration, community economic development, climate justice, and energy democracy. Colette was a lead coordinator for Gulf South Rising 2015, a regional initiative around climate justice and just transition in the South. Also in 2015, Colette was selected as an Echoing Green Climate Fellow, and in 2016 was named a White House Champion of Change for climate equity. In 2018, Colette joined the Movement for Black Lives Policy Table leadership team to advance national work on climate justice. Colette is a 2019 Obama Fellow and TED Fellow. The title of Colette's presentation is The Wisdom to Save the Planet. Your turn, Colette. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Peace, y'all. Colette Pichon Battle. I like when I give people the charge of trying to pronounce my name. I have one of those South Louisiana names that shows, there's something before this country, and I'm sure we can all agree we might have the opportunity to make something better after January 20th. So I want to offer my gratitude to the organizers, all the work that goes on behind these calls that nobody knows about. I offer my sincere gratitude to you. And peace to the indigenous nations on whose land we're all sitting. And peace to the folks who are gearing up tonight for a very difficult next few days. There are many communities on the front line tonight, including myself. I was late getting on the call because folks are having to get provisions and groceries and get ready for what we know is always taken out on Black bodies and Black lives when the sort of white middle class or the white elite get angry in this nation, how that plays out on people in my community. So peace to all the folks getting ready for what will be a tough but necessary transition starting tomorrow. I am interested and so grateful for this conversation and even to hear such great speakers. And we're having this discussion in the midst of a challenge to our government system. And so, here we are. And I think it's important that we come out of this moment certainly on alert, certainly ready for what is possible to come our way, thinking about the defense that we might have to play tomorrow and the days after. But I also think, and I appreciate this discussion because we also need to be thinking offensively. We don't just have the workings of our government at stake here. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has us right now at 9 years until we reach a point of no return on our planet. And while we're sitting here having discussions about who gets what kind of stimulus check, we really need to keep our eye on the bigger ball here, which is that the clock is ticking on what we need to do around this global climate problem. And as we consider this emergence from this moment, we have to really be honest about a few facts, which are hard sometimes for people to address. But I'll assume I'm invited to this conversation because folks know I'll bring a particular truth that might be hard to talk about, but it is important for us to consider as we consider all of this great work that we heard about today. We have to understand that this moment is actually not a new moment. I talked to somebody today about 60s, and they didn't know if I was talking about the 1960s or the 1860s, and in fact, probably both. What we're experiencing right now is not new, but this time we're in the midst of this crisis of democracy, while our food, our water, our air, our land, our communities, all of these things are at stake. And so we have much more to lose than just a political moment in time. This time, our planet and the status of the people on the planet are in the mix as well. And we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful about what happens to this country when the white middle class gets activated. Because while we can see major shifts in policies, we've heard reference to the New Deal. I think we have some of probably the best legislative directors out there. Things happen, things move. But oftentimes, when the white middle class moves without a deeper understanding of what this country is and how things really work, sometimes even good ideas are moving, but they're moving in a way that hurts a working class or a class of people that we've been actually taught and indoctrinated to not even see or care about. And so I get nervous and excited about this moment. I think we absolutely need a comprehensive climate bill. I think we need it. I agree with all of the speakers that have gone before. We need this. We've got to move on this. The time is now. The problem is when we often move on these comprehensive things, these comprehensive actions at the federal level, the policy that is advancing a white middle class agenda is often creating invisibilized consequences on the working class. And the working class of this country is overwhelmingly poorer. I mean, if we want to really start being honest about the wealth gap in this country, we would take a deep look at what the poverty rates really are, of what it really takes to run and manage your family. And you would see that there are way more families than those who qualify under the federal poverty guidelines. There are way more families who are struggling to just make ends meet. And these folks are in line for what I would consider, these folks and my folks are in line for what I would consider a very critical moment. A moment where, and I agree with the previous speaker, we've got to figure out how to move together or else we're going to end up hurting each other. The working class of this country is a very large portion of it are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And there is an overwhelming number of people in poverty who live in the South. The highest percentages of people living in poverty exist in Mississippi, Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia. It's important that I say those states because if you can get a visualization of those states that I just named, there's another truth that we have to tell, which is there is still a legacy of slavery that we've never dealt with in this country. We just ask people to make their own personal choices and just get themselves out of a situation that they never got themselves in the first place. And we don't acknowledge that this economic system that we're moving in is actually one rooted in the extraction of all of the resources from these places. And so there's a racial wealth divide statistic that a graphic that I like to show from the Institute of Policy Studies, and I hope you'll take the time to look for it. And it shows wealth of white families, Latino families, and Black families over about a 20-year period, with the wealth of Black families anticipated in about 20 years to be at 107,000, the wealth of Latino families anticipated to be 165,000, and the average wealth of white families in the United States anticipated to be $1.2 million. If we don't start understanding this racial wealth divide, we will not understand how people can recover from disaster, respond, even engage in government. This is not equal ground we're playing on, and this is not a fair economy or a fair political governance system that we're living in. So we can't make policies that assume we are. And why do I bring in race? Well, one, my name is Colette Pichon. I always bring in race. And if I were in a Black community and a Black conversation, I'd always bring in climate. And these two things are inextricably linked, especially in this country. But I don't just bring in race to be provocative. I bring in race because we live in a country with an economic system that's rooted in racialized capitalism. And we have to understand that the economic system that is driving our wealth, our everyday life, the comforts that we feel every day, are also driving the climate crisis. This is hard to talk about. We somehow want to figure out a market mechanism so that we can keep our wealth, keep our comfort, and keep everything that we have, but not actually make any kind of necessary transformative change that we need to see to save this planet. We've got to change the way we think about this stuff. And it's necessary to address that even if we don't want to talk about race so explicitly, we have to examine the impact of the climate crisis on marginalized and targeted communities. It's important for us to really understand that what we're dealing with, y'all, is not just an ability to pass federal legislation, although that is one part of this conversation. We're talking about a need to transform our entire economy. And that's something that many folks, especially folks who are very comfortable every day, don't really see a need to do. There's nothing wrong with the economy. It's working. Well, that's right. It's working, and it's working for you, and it's designed to work for you. It's also designed not to work for other folks who are on the front lines of climate change. In order to advance this transformation, we're going to have the courage to acknowledge the truth about this country, and we're going to have to understand courage as a daily practice. We don't just get to say Black Lives Matter one time. We don't just get to say, yes, our economic system is terrible. We have to say every day the truths about this country and the truths about this nation. We have to transform our economy, and this is going to require a little discomfort. So I'll say this because, I just want everybody to be okay. Take a breath. Here it comes. Yes, friends, we're going to have to connect our movement to divest from fossil fuels and invest in sustainability to the same movement that's calling for a divestment from the things that harm people in their community to things that help and sustain people in their community. Of course, we don't want to talk about defund the police. We don't want to talk about this radical vision, but this is what we're talking about. The divestment framework is the divestment framework. We have to stop putting money into things that harm us and put the money into things that sustain us. This requires us to change the political philosophy of this country, which is rooted in extraction, oppression, and domination. And I'm not saying that to be provocative, friends. I love this nation. I love Louisiana. It's the best state around. And also, we have a problem, and we have to have the courage to address some of these things. Federal policies that we push forward, they're going to need to actually not just stop carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. They're going to have to address and include restoration and repair. It's time for the mainstream climate movement to acknowledge the same place where emissions are coming from is the same place that's been poisoning Black and brown communities for generations. The environmental justice fight that has been telling everybody to come to this moment and see what is poisoning folks is now saying, we don't want to talk about the poison in the ground or the air. We just want to reduce the carbon emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions. Do you know how disrespectful that is? Because what we're saying is we want everyone who's comfortable to remain comfortable. And we're going to have the courage to get a little bit out of the comfort zone if we want to address this the right way. In addition to addressing or understanding the climate crisis as linked to the environmental justice crisis, we're going to have to make an acknowledgement about this country. We cannot pass legislation to just reduce carbon emissions from our side. We need to do it. But we have to pass legislation that actually acknowledges the role of the United States and very few other industrialized nations that have put all of this stuff in the air in the first place. Your comfort, my comfort, our comfort is killing the planet. And we have no conversation about how we're going to change what we demand the market to supply to us. We're sitting here saying we want to do things so you can, generate money over here and sort of let the bad things still happen over there. We're going to have to change, y'all. It's not going to be easy. The time is now. The clock is running out. I want you to consider supporting the movement for Black lives. We are advancing a red, black, and green New Deal. This advancement of a red, black, and green New Deal will address the original sins of this nation, the original sins against the indigenous folks and the original sins against the Black folks who are still feeling the implications of the beginnings of this country and the extraction that has occurred in those communities and really left us to where we are right now. The Red, Black, and Green New Deal is going to take accountability for the global climate impact of this nation. We cannot just put our attention on laws to get our country in adherence to some sort of numerical structure on a piece of paper. We are causing damage as a nation around the globe, and we have to see our national and federal legislation address that. And the Red, Black, and Green New Deal is going to address the repair and restoration, not only of our industrialization space on the planet, but also what this extractive economic policy has done to people in this country and around the planet. So when I get to this point, I gotta pray. I'm a Southerner, you know, everybody down there, we like to pray. Damon opened with some Bible scripture, amen. And here's what I have. You know, there's this serenity prayer that says, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Here is what I have changed the prayer to. I just asked the Lord to bless it. We'll see what the Lord says. Lord, please grant white people the serenity to accept the leadership from the front lines, the courage to engage in a daily practice to tell the truth about this country, and the wisdom of an engaged formation of elders connected to the next generation to save the planet. I know this is hard to hear, y'all. I know this is shocking even for some folks, but as has been said so many times, this is what our country needs right now. We've got to figure out how to bring all of our movements together, how to tell the truth to each other, how to still be loving and respectful despite all of it, and how to be relentless in our demand for climate action at the federal level. That concludes my remarks.
Thanks, Colette. You were true, not provocative. Our final speaker before Q&A is Joel Stronberg, an attorney with over 40 years of experience in federal and state energy, environmental, and sustainability issues, and founder of the JBS Group, a Washington, D.C. consulting firm advising and representing public and private sector clients since 1981. Stanford University's Millennial Alliance for Humanity and the Biosphere is among several platforms he has contributed to, and a second edition of his book, Earth versus Trump, A Failure to Protect, is due to be released early this year. The title of Joel's overview is Climate Policy in the Biden Era, A Look Ahead. Thanks, Joel. You're on mute. Joel, you're on mute.
How's that?
There you go.
All right. Mark asked me to be quick, so I will. First of all, this is the beginning of a 2-day period that is really great. Today, in the U.S. District Court of Appeals in Washington, they struck down the program, the regulatory scheme that Trump replaced the clean policy plan with. It's now back in the EPA's backyard, and they're going to have to come out with a new piece of a new series of of regulations. Hopefully, they won't go back to the CPP. I mean, things have moved on, and it's time for the proposals to move on with them. I'd like to bracket my comments at the very beginning by saying, I think these are the worst of times in some sense. And remember that I've been in Washington for 40 years, and becoming jaded is probably one of the dangers. But on the other side, we have so much possibility here. I mean, we have an administration that is willing to talk about the issues across the board. I mean, it is all of government's job to be involved with the environment and cleaning it up and finding ways to create resilience and meet other needs. By the same token, it's going to be a very conflicting time. It's something that Trump has certainly created conflicts that are going to be riding with everything that's going to be said over the next 2 years. And let me echo again that time is of the essence. And in this case, we're talking about political time more than we are climate time. And we have 2 years to get something on the books. In the first few days of the Biden administration, he's going to be putting out a lot of executive orders. Most of them, as far as the environment is concerned, will be undoing what it was that Trump has done. And that's not going to be any small task. Not only do they have to put new regulations in place, but he's going to have to repopulate federal agencies with people that have left or were forced out because of their experience and their environmental ethos. They were dumped by Trump. And in some cases, there are people from the Trump administration that have been, in fact, embedded in some of these agencies. The regulatory scheme is also something that, I mean, we need legislation that will, in fact, begin to make the next series of regulations law-proof, if you will. I mean, a lot of the questions that have not been resolved is standing, for example, the youth legal cases that try to get environment part of the civil rights as a civil right. After 5 years, they never had standing. So they never got off the original issue of, can you come in here and plead this case? Well, I feel that what you should do is then modify legislation that gives them the standing so that you can dispense with a lot of the legal questions ahead of time. Another issue I'd like to, at least in response to what other people say, and then I'll kind of get out of this, is that don't look for a comprehensive bill, which is not to say that we shouldn't have a comprehensive vision of where we're going and what we need. You can't do A without anticipating or knowing about B, C, and D. And I think this can become particularly an issue because of the heavy emphasis. This I would put in the good side of the Times, is that 40% of Biden's proposals are involved with environmental justice. And I think the two things that are happening here that have never happened before is the conversation is across all of the federal agencies, number one. And number two, it's a lot more inclusive about the citizens of the United States. You know, I was there in the 60s, the 1960s, not the 1860s, as a legal aid attorney, which is where I started life as a legal aid attorney. And, you know, I'm in a position at this point where all of a sudden I see what I was and what I am coming together in what I need to be. And so I look forward to giving a long version of what to expect as far as policy next month. And please feel free to contact me. I will give out my emails and stuff. I guess, Jen, to you to put out, or Mark? Okay, I'm going.
Well, I'm just gonna chime right in here because thank you, Joel. We only have 10 minutes for questions. So what I'm gonna do is, there are a bunch of questions in the Q&A, and I'm really sorry, but I don't think we have time to go through them. If somebody from the panel wants to address any of them, go ahead. But I thought, since we just have 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna ask a question that each of the panelists can address that hopefully is comprehensive across to all of what you talked about. And that is, and I'm going to take from what Felice said about we have 100 days to really get things going. The first 100 days are going to be super important. So if you were to involve a group of elders, but really just citizens, we're normal people, not just elders, of one thing or two things that we should be doing in the next 100 days, I'd like to go around and I'll call on each one of you, and I'd ask you to say something. And I'd like to start with Felice, and also Felice, since you said that you didn't think we should work with the people who denied the Biden victory in Congress. I'm not sure why you're saying that, if that has anything to do with how, you know, some of us might be in districts where we have Congress people, for example, who did vote against the Biden victory. So, you know, I'd just like to hear from you what you think we can do regardless of what district we're in.
Okay, sure. So I might be a bit repetitive, but that's okay. Being repetitive is okay. I think first, most important is to schedule a meeting with your member of Congress. And if you already have people who can join you from your community, it's really, really important. Members of Congress care about one thing, and they care about getting re-elected. So that's pretty much a kind of an ongoing thing. If they don't get the votes, they're not going to be in office. So bring a few friends, have a meeting. If you don't know them, get to know them, read about them, find out, there's all sorts of information about them. And especially if you're working with, when you're meeting with members of Congress, it's always like 6 degrees of separation with a member of Congress. It's within your district. So have a meeting, really, really important. In terms of the group that that voted to certify the elections, I'll just be really clear. They were at the tip of the spear of what we saw unfold last week. And we are very clear that we are not, I mean, am I telling you not to meet with that member of Congress? You can meet with that member of Congress and you might not go in there and talk about climate. And maybe you'll talk about their role in what unfolded last week. We just, at EDF, we firmly believe that these members of Congress, they need to be held accountable. So if they're your member of Congress, I'm not going to tell you not to meet with them. If it was my member of Congress, I know what I would meet with them on. And I work like hell to make sure they don't get reelected. I'm just saying that right here, because they do not deserve to be in office. They are undermining democracy. And that should not be tolerated.
Thank you. Appreciate those remarks. I'm going to call on you next, Cindy. And one of the things that I'm interested in from CCL, well, just from conservatives, because you are affiliated, knowledge about conservative groups. I listen to conservative media quite a bit, but sort of the never Trumper conservative media, so not the real conservative. And whenever
wait a minute. I think the real conservatives are the never Trumpers myself.
Okay.
I think the Trumpers are the false conservatives.
Okay, but not the far right media.
Speaking for myself, not for CCL.
But I notice whenever, like on Bulwark podcast or whatever, whenever the Green New Deal comes up, or it's like always ridiculed. And so, and I feel like when people talk about we need to do everything at once, that the real conservatives sort of close down because it's just too much all at once. And we can see with your policy, CCL, it's very discreet. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but
Sure.
What Elders Climate Action can do in the next 100 days, given this context.
Part of CCL's DNA is to be respectful to others and to recognize there are other values and points of view. And we would definitely never criticize others who are advocating different approaches to meaningfully address climate change. We're not criticizing the Green New Deal. We do believe that the carbon fee is front and center, the most important thing to do, with a dividend that goes back to people that will benefit the communities that the Green New Deal wants to help. So we have a good chunk in common with them. So I think, what we're trying to do would achieve a good chunk of what they're trying to do, and we're never going to criticize that. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to have to move on. Love to talk more, but Demand, in terms of what you think we should do in the next 100 days, what would be the one action that a member of Elders Climate Action or the organization could take?
Yeah, I think we need to push into the realm of monetary policy. That's literally, we watched the Federal Reserve System. I'm literally emailing Colette right now about the Federal Reserve System is something that we've ignored. Wall Street has it completely captured. We're the only industrialized country that uses our central bank only to prop up the financial sector. So that meme out there is where the money resides, right? Literally the Fed creates the money. There's a lot of stuff that we need to see on repairing past harm, to investing in the new stuff to get to a clean economy that can be financed directly by the Fed. And the Fed is a regulator. So the Fed actually discounting assets on the balance sheets. right? Oil reserves aren't assets, you know? So there's a lot of work happening there, but I think we need to also think about monetary policy, not just the regulatory side, but monetary policy, be very clear that we have allies on those committees that have the oversight and they can ask questions. The Fed is independent, but the president and his staff can ask questions. Members of Congress on that committee can ask questions and give a permission structure for the Fed to do things that it knows it wants to do. They see it coming, right? And what it needs to do is understand how to be useful in preventing a crisis versus just responding to a crisis.
Okay. Okay, thanks. And just a few things for Jen, if you can post. There's a few things in the chat about saving the chat and posting demand. You're with New Consensus, right, Demand? And
that's right. I'm also typing the response to this.
Okay. Okay, great. So Todd, can I count on you for a 30-second answer on what we should do next as elders in the first 100 days?
As elders, I think
citizens. Elders are just like other people.
I think the most important thing we need to do is figure out how we're going to unite to act as one. I don't think anything else matters. Everything else we've been doing in a million different directions for decades has not worked. So if we keep doing the same thing and expect different results, you know how that goes. So if we're not uniting, I think we're spinning our wheels. I think so. That's it. And I would encourage everyone to go to the website to study the solutions by each sector. There's 700 of them listed there, and there are more. And learn the substance of the solutions. Educate ourselves on the details so that we can then follow the legislative process. It's all about getting these solutions into law. Nothing else will save us at the scale required or make them transition at the timeline required, except for changing the laws and the systems. So with that, join us, please. There's a link in there to adopt your district. And I agree with Felice. You got to go meet your congressperson, but don't do it alone. Build a mini coalition and join the Adopt a District program. Meet your local neighbors and policies across the board and unite that way first. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel, I'm not gonna, it might seem a little rude, but since you're gonna be talking in our national call next month, I'm gonna leave you out and we're gonna close out with Colette. And Colette, it's not Pichon, it's Pichon.
It's Pichon. It's Pichon. You got it right. You got it right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think in the next 100 days, members should read either The New Jim Crow, The Shock Doctrine, or Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, Naomi Klein, and Michelle Alexander. You can pick any or all of those. You should do that. I think you should identify and support local groups who are on the front line working to address the extractive economies that exist in all of our communities. This means not going to those normal groups that you hear of, that have the marketing ability, but go to the groups who are on the front line of the problem and who are trying to build up power at the front lines of extraction and oppression and targeting. And it's time to develop a daily practice around courage. Courage has to be practiced every day. And the Jimenez principles say you have to have a commitment to self-transformation. No time like the present. Take a walk, commit yourself to transforming how you live on this planet and how we as a society live and as a nation live with our global community. I think we've got 100 days to get everybody on track. Let's all get on board and let's go.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks so much for all your comments. Colette, we'll collect those, if you can type the names of the books in the chat now, otherwise we'll collect them from you later. And yeah, thanks so much. We really hope to be in touch with all of you as we move forward. And yeah, here's hoping for a meaningful, peaceful transition tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that about does it. I do want to thank so much everybody who agreed to speak tonight. It was a wonderful conversation. I think we wish we would have had more time. As mentioned earlier, next Tuesday, I think I mentioned it early, we'll have another presentation on transportation. If you'd like to join in on, again, that's next Tuesday at this time. In the meantime, we just wish you a good evening. And again, thank you so much for doing this for us and to our membership. Thank you.